Hi, my name's Kelly Gilson, and I'm the Executive Director at United Way Oxford. I invite you to join us on our new Let's Talk Local Oxford series. We'll share everything about United Way Oxford, our work, our partners, our investments, and how everything we do is designed to create positive social change right here at home in Oxford County. Not only do we want to share, but we hope to inspire you to join in our efforts and learn ways in which you too can show your local love. So, let's talk local, Oxford.
Woodstock Libro Credit Union is the proud sponsor of Let's Talk Local Oxford.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Local, Oxford. This is our episode number 2, so we're like an old hat at it now. Before we get going, I really want to thank Libro Credit Union for stepping up and sponsoring this podcast. Incredibly generous of them. They too are very local and community minded, and we are very appreciative for their support to help us share this information. So before we get going, I want to do a quick reflect and recap a bit about our first episode. We discussed United Way's unique position in the community and how together, more than ever, we can make meaningful change for those in our community needing assistance. We also talked about how United Way does the work that we do, and we shared some of the questions that are most often asked to our staff and our volunteers as we're out and about in the community. And so each episode, we want to dive a little bit deeper and learn a little bit more. And so today we're talking about community impact, because really everything we do is around impacting our community in a positive way. That's the reason we exist, right there. And so I'm thrilled that we have a guest. I feel like Ellen. We have a guest today, and our guest is Cheryl Mccackey. And Cheryl Mccackey has a long history of involvement with United Way Oxford, both as a volunteer and a staff member. So Cheryl, thank you for joining us. Us. Our community.
My pleasure, Kelly and Mike. So a brief overview of how I got involved in this. I did start off as a volunteer with United Way Oxford after I retired from education. I joined the board of directors, thought to myself, a meeting a month, it'll be, keep me busy a little bit. Little did I know, because at that time, the board of directors at that time had made the decision to move to more of a funding impact model, and they were just beginning their journey, and so things like the Harwood training was just starting up, sort of changing our strategic plan. All those things were beginning, and I was lucky enough to get involved in the very beginning of that. Got to do some of that Harwood training, and really got involved in the whole impact sessions. Leading a group of wonderful volunteers and really just finding our way through this whole process. So once I was finished with the board of directors, Kelly was kind enough to ask me to continue to work for them for part-time, and I quite enjoyed it. It's been quite a meaningful experience for me. So, it's really been an interesting thing because we've gone out to the community and had conversations with people, and I always used to say that, you might think you know what people need or want, but until you talk to them, then you're really going to find out. And so that's really what we've been doing, isn't it, Kelly, for the last few years?
It absolutely is. And let me just backtrack for a quick second to say how incredibly blessed we were, because in Cheryl's really kudos where kudos are due. In Cheryl's 6 years on our board, it was a whole lot more than a meeting a month, let me tell you. I mean, we were on a journey really hand in hand, and it was a learning journey, but it was a lot of work. It was actually a lot of engaging and interesting learning. But it has that work fundamentally changed the way our United Way works, and then you've been gracious to carry it on so that we can really get our feet under and stabilized in how we're doing that. And of course, that was before we thought about a pandemic, and that has thrown a little wrench in things as well. But we are really moving forward well to where we want to be, and just making great strides. So thank you for everything.
Well, part of that is we were operating on trust. We were told the hardwood approach was a good process. And there were many times when we would just sort of shake our heads and go, I'm not sure where this is taking us. But now as we reflect back over that journey, that 10-year journey now, it really was. A lot of it was done on trust, but you can start to see what we always call those little ripples of so many things that we didn't even know were going to be important to the community. And they have become important to the community. So that, to me, has been one of the most unexpected but rewarding parts of this whole role, is to be able to look back and say, because we funded this, because we worked with this agency, these are the things happening now in our community. Yeah.
And I think what's so cool about that is, although this was a journey, and we're going to get back to kind of the why of the journey in a sec, but because this was a journey, we were starting to improve the way we work and the way that we could impact our community. We didn't realize that others would benefit so much from this work as well. And not just from the investments, I mean, that's a piece, but we have shared, like one of the things that we have committed throughout is communication and sharing and making sure others have access to that knowledge that we gain, whether it's in training or presentations. And it really has had this benefit across numerous organizations, and I dare say numerous volunteers and individuals as well.
Yeah, often that's what our Impact Council talks about is why they enjoy the work so much, because we ask a lot of them in a very short little window of time, but they all say it's so rewarding, and it's nice to be able to make decisions based on real authentic knowledge of the community, and certainly our agencies who we have funded, and even some that we haven't been able to fund, are along that process with us. So their work goes deep, and it really is a rewarding experience.
So I'm just going to take us back a little bit. It's 10, 12 years ago now, I think, when our board started having a conversation about we need to be looking towards the future. We want to be evolving and growing to do the best we can, and we think we need to change. We think we can do better. So we were doing great, but we think we can do better. And so that was a really interesting time for our organization, because it became apparent pretty quickly that to make the kind of changes we wanted, to make those investment changes, to be maybe able to adapt quicker, or to deal with, at that time, things that were emerging issues. Like 12 years ago, people weren't really talking about poverty, as an example. I mean, we had poverty, but we weren't talking about it. And so in order to kind of change, we realized pretty quickly that the old hip bone really was connected to the thigh bone. So we couldn't do one change without negatively perhaps impacting organizations in another way.
Right.
So it was a really unique journey to try and get us through from the beginning to the point of change, and making sure that our agencies came along with us. A lot of learning, and a lot of recognition that through our change, lots of other new opportunities would emerge, but it would mean change for others as well, right?
Well, it really is based on the turning outward proposition, right? And like I said before, you can sit there and think you know what your community needs, or think you know what this person needs, but until you actually reach out and turn outward, you really can't know that for sure. And that was really the big moment is when we started, instead of turning inward and saying, okay, we know our agencies are doing good work, and we know that they were doing really good work, but we weren't really be able to say what was the work. We got sort of a one night show, basically, where they would tell us all the great things they're doing. And really, I always remember a comment, I think you made it, Kelly, was it's time for us to know what the community needs so that we can fund in a way that creates that impact that we want in the community. So, yeah.
And it was really, our systems before, this is really the way United Ways have historically worked. We have great volunteers who were dedicated, who would meet with agencies. We would review applications. So we were always accountable and transparent. None of that was ever in question. But we wanted to get deeper. We wanted to learn more about the issues at hand, the issues that were impacting our citizens, and where there were gaps, and where there was an opportunity for us. And the other thing that I think drove some of that change is we wanted to look at root causes.
Right.
And how, I remember we had this ogre story where, there's an ogre on the bridge and he's throwing babies off the bridge, and the villagers get mobilized and they all come together and they're pulling the babies out of the water because, of course, you want to save the babies in the river. But what we really want is to go and stop the ogre from putting the babies in the river to start, right? And if we can do that, and if we can invest in that mindset, we can really change social conditions. And so that was kind of the motivating factor. And I think the other piece that was really interesting as we went on that multi-year journey is we were committed to the wonderful partners we had at that time, the funded agencies, all who were doing and still do actually amazing work in the community, and we knew that we were going to work towards an open funding model, but we held dear to that piece that we were going to do it over time and respectfully, and that they would be the first to know every single decision we made along that route.
But as you said, many of those agencies were on that very same journey themselves, also wanting to know impact and being a little more data driven. And so as we started to talk about all of that, they certainly were having similar conversations with their peers in terms of changing the kinds of work they were doing and measuring the impact that they were actually having in the community. So it really did come together quite nicely, and we were able to help them, and they certainly were able to help us. And and some of them, again, respectfully said, you know what, we probably don't fit this anymore, and we probably, we can go elsewhere. But we brought new partners to the table, which has been really exciting. Yeah,
it has. And one of my, that you go through pieces and time periods, and you have sometimes these aha moments. One of the most moving pieces of that entire sort of beginning journey for me was, and I can think of two organizations in particular, and I won't name them, but they were funded partners of ours for many, many, many years. We had strong, deep connections. They were doing, and still are, great work in the community. And they came to us before we even finished the project, before we kind of fully made the change, and said, we don't think we will carry on with you. We think other organizations are going to need this money more.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're going to let you go forward so you can have the money that we would have given to them to continue on that journey. And that they were good with that. They understood. They know their role in the community, and they saw the role where we were going. Yeah. And I thought that was incredibly ethical and responsible and incredibly kind. The staff and the volunteers, their boards that made those decisions, to me, should be incredibly proud.
One of the things that allowed those agencies to make that decision was the fact that we were working our way through, again, community conversations, and I know we will talk a little bit more about what those were, but in going out to the community and finding out what people wanted, what their hopes and aspirations were, what it was going to take to build the kind of community that we all want, that's where we started to really say, okay, these are the things we need to look at funding now. And as you say, some of these will lead to dealing with root causes. Some of them are just part of that journey. But when we built those strategies based on community needs and hopes and aspirations, that's where those other agencies, and any agency, could look at it and say, do I fit with that now? And that's where we got our new partners as well. They said, our group fits with this. We actually address those kinds of things. And others said, you know what, we don't, but that's okay. We're going to carry on, and they do.
Because there's room in the community for all.
Everybody.
This is just, we often talk about this, it takes a village.
Yep.
It really does take a village. And we are blessed to be able to be a part of that village, and we fund organizations, some organizations within the village, but it takes a lot more. And so our community has many, many helping hands out there, and we're a piece. Yeah, I think that was a big learning moment for us, how that sort of all evolved.
Well, I recall conversations when we were starting to bring with really our community impact team together for the table, and the richness of the conversation, and and some of those people worked in social services, and I remember many times where they would say, this is the first time I've actually talked to some of these other people. So that open dialogue that happened throughout this process, again, it wasn't something you and I planned or knew was going to happen, but when you got involved and you realized agencies were talking to agencies and saying, I didn't know they did that kind of work. When impact team members were saying, I had no idea that was going on in the community. That whole piece would just lift you up, basically, because you thought, our community's better now because people understand what other people are doing. And I would say, as much as we cannot take the credit for it, that whole open door, policy kind of thing, I almost feel had its roots in some of those early conversations, because what people, especially people, as I said, who worked for social services, said, we need to talk to those other people. We need to know and understand and work together. And we're very lucky because we have many of those groups now who totally work hand in hand. We, and part of what we are still striving for is to not just have standalone agencies, but to have agencies who now know where they can go and partner with other groups to be stronger and to do more work and to do better work and have bigger impact. And I can see over the last 10 years, we totally didn't start off that way, but I can see it inching to that. And again, that's an exciting piece, to know that everybody has a little piece of, let's say, the poverty pie. We all have our role, and we're getting to the point where you can see where people are starting to work together to address some of those really key issues.
Yeah, in a much deeper way.
Deeper, yeah.
And you mentioned the ripple effect, and I think that's a perfect example. That wasn't what we were setting out to do.
Not at all.
But that is a beautiful byproduct for us and for others. And I think now going back to the conversation piece, and I know we're going to get into a lot more depth in our next podcast on the conversation, but I do think it's important to touch why that was different compared to, because I've been here a long time. I can say that we, United Way Oxford, did community conversations long before we made these changes, long before the last 10 years, but they weren't the same.
No.
They were quite different. This is a more intentional, open kind of process, and maybe you could just give a little highlight as to why that was different.
It's different because there's no agenda. When you have these conversations with whatever group, whether it's a group of seniors, a group of kids, people who are collecting OW, newcomers to our community, you don't have an agenda. You're not trying to lead the conversation one way or another. So it's very open-ended. And really they all start the same, is think about your community and what are your hopes and aspirations for the community that you live in. And there's always that little minute or two of nothing.
Crickets.
But if you're, former educator, you wait, and then they start to talk. And I know you and I often talked about, once those conversations got going, what was meant to be maybe a 40-minute conversation often went well over to an hour and a half. People didn't want them to stop. So you would ask them those things, but then you would also ask them, so what gets in the way of that? So if this is the community you envision, if this is what it looks like, what is getting in the way? And so now you start to get to, well, maybe it's this and it's this and it's this. And then basically in the end you say, well, so what are some concrete things we could start to do about all of this? It sounds so simple, but the information you get from a group is just amazing. And I think what you and I were both struck by is it honestly didn't matter in many ways who you spoke to. As I said, it could be seniors, it could be youth, it could be homeless people, it could be, as I said, newcomers, it could be any group of people.
And anywhere in the county.
And anywhere in the county. It might have a bit of a slant, depending on who they were, but in the end, the heart and soul of the conversations, you could see what we call themes emerge. And then, so you would walk away after maybe the fifth conversation saying, here's what I'm hearing. Is this what you're hearing? But again, you don't want to go in with an agenda. You let the conversations develop and you make really thorough notes so that you don't lose anything. And then when you start to see these themes, it just tells you, in the end, we're more alike than we think. Yeah.
That is so true. Mm-hmm. And I think what was also really interesting is those themes, and we will get to more detail on them, but they helped us understand some of the existing programs and services with a different lens, a different idea, and we were able to not only use that information for ourselves, but we shared that broadly. So sometimes for some of the other organizations, whether they were partners of ours, I mean, we're still partners in the bigger sea of community work, and it was sometimes there were these aha moments where an organization would be giving a really great program, providing a service or something, but then there was that little light bulb about, but that's a barrier for folks. And if we could do this, it would solve that problem. And then the program would be even better. And so I think that was a real win for our community, for sure. And so there were a few volunteers who were instrumental in helping us do these conversations and then theme the it was a lot of work. We've had dozens and dozens of conversations over these years with all kinds of different people, but so those are what we learned from those is public knowledge. So that is what matters to people in the community, their perspective, their experiences, all of those sort of pieces that are very near and dear to them and their families in particular. And then we take that information and what did we do with that, Cheryl?
Well, so we shared it with our experts. So we brought together the experts in the community, and we said, here's what public knowledge looks like. Here's what people are saying. Here's what they are identifying as perhaps a need, a gap, something, or here's what they would really like to see happen, would make their lives so much easier if this could happen. And then we layer it with the expert knowledge. And so a lot of times what would happen is they would, like you say, there'd be that little aha moment going, oh, they don't want to tell their story 10 times, right? What can we do about that? Or they might turn around and say, isn't that something? We actually have something to address that issue, but nobody knows about it, or nobody knows how to access it. So those things could be identified. But the experts also would agree many times and say, yes, it's a gap. So what do we do about it? And then that's where, as we dove deeper into some of that stuff, we built our funding strategies and said, if we can fund these things, if we can put some money behind these things, we actually can change that condition, and we can move the needle, or however you want to phrase that. So that expert knowledge gave us just that depth of knowledge necessarily.
And we had volunteers who joined us for that group of experts from all different areas. And they committed a lot of hours to help us work through and develop our strategies, our investment strategies based on that. And the other thing that was really cool about all of those folks, and there were 25 or
25
so.
to 30,
Yep. They also really left their egos at the door because there's if you are in a meeting and hearing that people are saying I wish we had this program or this service, and you're the one saying, but we do. And the people clearly didn't either know it or didn't particularly find it easy to access or whatever that issue was. It's really hard to not take some of that personally, but it wasn't meant to be personal.
Nope.
And so they were really professional in saying, you know what, the many people who spoke, their perception is their reality. So for them, those were the struggles or the challenges or the gaps or whatever that might be. And I think we all kind of came out much further ahead through that process. And so then we had our public knowledge and we had our expert knowledge, and we married that all up to have our first real investment strategy. So unlike historically where organizations would come to us and say, this is this, here are the areas we're working in, we'd like you to invest in these. We were able to go out and say, here are the strategies we wish to invest in, and please apply if you're doing that. And so can you tell us a little bit about what that looked like as we went down that process?
When we first started that, and as you said, we brought everybody together and we built those strategies. The challenge was to make them narrow, but not so narrow and not too broad, because then anybody could say, well, I fit that, and we don't want to waste anybody's time. So it was a challenge to build those strategies, but those very beginning strategies really did narrow our focus. So there were a lot of groups that maybe we would have funded in the past who really, they didn't fit that anymore. So when we took those strategies and we talked to the agencies who might apply, we put it out there and said, okay, if you think you fall or your work falls into these strategies, we do invite you to apply. And we started with a statement of interest because it was short and sweet, and we really didn't want to waste anybody's time with the full application by going through this and then saying, wow, they really don't fit. They think they do, but they don't, whatever. So agencies would apply. We had to do a little bit of, we had to do a lot of education even for the people reviewing the applications about what those strategies were. But what I kind of had thought about with those strategies is we quickly realized that we needed to go more narrow. And we did. After with the last set of community conversations, we said, you know what, we started off in a big, broad sense, even though we didn't intend to. So now our strategies are much more narrow, because as you said at the beginning, we're really trying to find our way to get to addressing root causes. And we want our strategies to really get to those things. So that's, in terms of the strategies, they really are the guiding principles in many ways of what we will fund.
And that's a new piece for us. So that was really exciting, for sure. But I also think that it was interesting how those are evolving and will continue to evolve.
Will continue
right?
to, yeah.
And I mean, we just have to look at what we've gone through for the last 2 years. So we're going out to do more conversations now shortly, because we've been kind of on hold. But we know what the situation was across our community pre-COVID, and we had a pretty good handle on that. And we know from obviously lots of interaction, things have changed, and we see that. But we are going to have to continue to go a bit deeper, because some of these social issues are just growing in magnitude.
Well, even our community conversations, the first round, again, we were just learning how to do these things, and I think we did a pretty decent job. But compared to the second and third rounds of community conversations that we've had, it's not that the themes have changed necessarily, but it's become more specific in the conversation. So it isn't just about, a belonging. It's, which was one of the themes that kept coming up. People want to belong to something. They want to feel like they belong to their community. But belonging really did turn into some more details about what that actually could look like, and what was getting in the way of people joining into things. And it's that kind of thing that we're doing. So I'm really looking forward to this next set of conversations, because again, with the pandemic fallout, it will be interesting to see what really has risen to the top. The last conversations, the first round, seniors were not on the people's conversations. The second set we did, seniors for sure.
In particular, housing and accessible, affordable housing.
They weren't anywhere near the first ones. They showed up, and I think if those next two rounds, again, I said we wouldn't go in with an agenda, but I'm kind of thinking we're going to hear more about isolated seniors, and we're going to hear more about this housing issue that we have in this.
How could we not?
And how could we not? Yeah, because I think that's front and foremost for people. So it'll be interesting to do that, but that will also impact on our strategies. So again, we will go back and look at those strategies and say, okay, what's really changed here? The last time we did that, we threw some out. We said, you know what? There's groups out there doing this work. We don't need to do it anymore. We don't need to fund that anymore. But nobody's doing this, so that's what we need to build our strategy around. And I suspect that's what's going to happen in this next round, is we will be building new strategies. Yeah.
And you're right. We're not looking to butt in where we aren't needed or where there isn't an opportunity, because there are not only great organizations, there's great funders or government funders that are picking up like the lion's share. But sometimes there's still a gap. And our idea is if we can fill that gap that makes the difference. And so, this whole process has been, when you know better, you do better, and we keep going down that path. And we also, I think it's really important to mention that we had a lot of principles that guided this work. We had so many volunteers who helped us, but things like open funding. So now that, organizations who are doing this work, who are eligible for funding, are welcome to apply. But we didn't fund collaborative work before.
No.
So now we do, which is a whole other spiel. We fund seed, like we can leverage some of the opportunities for leveraging investments has been huge. That wasn't our world before. So lots of opportunities there, I think, to make change and to invest where there's a readiness and an opportunity.
Well, and that's one of the guiding principles that our team, we go through it every time we meet to discuss applications, and it's the sweet spot. And we talk about that. Some of the applications that come through are fabulous, but really the question is the community ready to do that work? Because if the community isn't ready to do that work, it probably won't succeed. And I think anybody who's been involved in any kind of project can understand that. It might be the best thing in the world, and it might have worked really, really well in another community, but if your community isn't ready to do that work yet, it's not going to probably have success. So we really do look at what we call the sweet spot of public life, and if there's a readiness and an ability to do it, then we look really closely at those applications, because we want them to succeed. There's nothing worse than something that fails, because then everybody says, see, that didn't work, and wipe your hand of it, and away we go, right? And we don't want that.
No. But I will say, we actually have, not that we want to encourage failure, but for the first time, I think in the nonprofit world, it's really hard to fail. People are so reliant and dependent on generosity and our accountability to donors and our accountability to the community, right? No one wants to take a risk, but sometimes some of these investments you can learn from what didn't happen particularly well.
And we've had that,
and I think that's really important, because that has not been in the nonprofit mindset for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, we just this year we had a group that we had funded last year. It was a brand new program, and we were really curious to see how they have been doing. And of course, the agencies do have to do midterm reports and year-end reports, so we had sort of had a glimpse of how things were going. But it was interesting when they came back with their new application. They said, here's what we've learned, and we've actually changed our focus a little bit. And you go, great, because it's based on the real data, right?
Yeah.
So we are okay with that.
So I think you hit another important point just before we wrap up, is when we so we have all of these wonderful volunteers. This past year, we had about 25 volunteers who continue to help us make our decisions. It's not us making them.
We don't do it, no.
It is the community who come together as volunteers. Probably about 1,200 to 1,500 volunteer hours.
Yes.
So for anyone who thinks this is a quick decision, it's not. It's a really dedicated process. And so they do make those decisions and they do that. But we don't just make a decision and then write a check to organizations. There's reporting, there's tracking, there's measurement. That matters, right?
There is. And prior to the pandemic, we were meeting with agencies just to do check-ins and say, how's it going? And what are you learning? And hopefully we're going to get back to that. I mean, we could certainly do that easily enough with Zoom too. So, but you're right, we do check-ins all the time. And I think it's the relationships we've built with a lot of these agencies that they feel okay reaching out and saying, I'm not sure about this, and what do you think about that? And they're quite comfortable reaching out to you in particular about some of the struggles that they're experiencing, especially in the last couple of years.
And that helps us focus on maybe some training opportunities that we can give to organizations. One of the things that we always say we do is we mobilize and we collaborate and we connect people. So sometimes if there's a struggle or a group needing more, we can connect them to another group that might provide that. And so, I mean, those relationships really matter, and they are, they continue to evolve. And we are one of the villagers in the village that helps to, create a strong, healthy Oxford community for all. I think we're all focused in the same direction, but we all have a different role to play. So that's, I think, a little bit about how we make our funding decisions and the process of why we kind of made our changes and the process of the work involved in it. I hope that people found that interesting to understand how much rigor is actually behind those decisions and how how amazing the organizations are and their volunteers and their clients actually to come in and to meet with us and to provide all kinds of information in a respectful way. So thank you, Cheryl, for joining us and sharing your history with us on this journey to community impact. And I invite people to join in and listen to our next episode. And we're actually going to talk about those community conversations. We're going to do a deeper dive there so that people can understand what we have heard through the years from a variety of individuals, and how that's kind of changed and how we've changed with it, if you will. And once again, I would really like to thank Lee Road Credit Union for their support in sponsoring this podcast. We are ever so grateful to them as a community partner. And I thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Let's Talk Local, Oxford. Take care. Thank you for listening to Let's Talk Local, Oxford. If you would like to learn more about United Way Oxford, our work, our engagement, our volunteer opportunities, our partners, or to even make a donation, please visit unitedwayoxford.ca or call our office. We love to chat, and we really love visitors too. If, however, you find yourself needing a hand to locate a program or a service, please call 211, our information and referral service. They're there to connect you to local supports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Remember, 211, they are there to help. Until next time, join with us by showing your local love. We all could use a little more of that. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Let's Talk Local Oxford, proudly sponsored by Woodstock Libro Credit Union.